Okay, so welcome everyone to the session on electric mobility, the promise of electric vehicles to maximize environmental benefits. I'd like to welcome our panelists and tell a little bit about a background from the World Bank, our perspective. We have been receiving more and more requests from governments from all, I work in Latin America, but we work on this in China, we work on this in many, many countries all over the world, to help them on more of the technical side, on how they procure these new electric vehicles that are coming strongly, how they speed up the incorporation of the electric vehicles and can take advantage of the benefits that they can bring. And I can see also some of our partners here, obviously ICCT, NWRI, and IDB and GIZ, all of those. We're trying to coordinate ourselves so we do a good job in responding to our clients' needs. Some of this work, and I'll do a little bit of not personal, but my team marketing here is the result of this more recent work is here in this report. It's outside, and the name is Green Your Bus Ride, Clean Buses in Latin America, and a little bit of the diagnosis, what's going on in Latin America. We recently published a position paper which we presented in Poland. So I think the World Bank now has a position on the subject. And I think we're ready to take this on very strongly. We always make sure to include the solution of electric under the paradigm of sustainable mobility. So we want to make sure that we understand that this is in the avoid, shift, and improve. This is the improve part. And we are committed to make this happen. And we'll be able to see a little bit of that experience and enormous good examples here through our panelists. So I would like to invite Emma Stewart, the director from Urban Efficiency and Climate from WRI, to start the conversation. Does
this work? Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm just going to describe a little bit of what we have learned and unearthed over the past year or so. Thanks to our friends at BMZ in Germany, we've had the privilege of studying in relatively close detail 16 different cities, most of them in the global south, through a combination of desktop research, quantitative analysis, interviews, and on-site visits. And what we found over the course of those investigations is a pattern that I've broken into 4 categories, admitting that this is relatively deductive, reductive, but also easy to remember. And those are 4 categories, all of which happen to start with P. I'm a fan of alliteration. Policy, procurement, people, and paying for it. And I think the overarching theme of what we at World Resources Institute are endeavoring to do with the cities we support is take them from these pilots that are inspiring many conversations to common practice, yet 2 more Ps. So I'm going to walk you through each of these categories in great brevity. But in the policy rubric, this is often the most invisible, but also one of the most insidious barriers to scaling up of electric fleets. We took a particularly hard look at buses as a major opportunity within control of cities. And we found universally a lack of favorable policies to incentivize or even just guide the adoption of electric buses. A couple examples of that would be jurisdictional issues. So cities, even like Shenzhen, that have really been at the vanguard, encountered jurisdictional issues with respect to access to land. Maybe they were renting land that they really needed permanent access to in order to give themselves the confidence that they could establish charging stations and upgrade the grid infrastructure. Another jurisdictional issue that is commonplace is the lack of influence over informal transit systems, kind of by definition, which often represent the majority of vehicles bringing passengers from one place to another in the global south, and also the majority of the most polluting vehicles. And so with the exception of some very creative mechanisms to incentivize and convert those fleets, cities really are kind of outside of their jurisdictional control. In the second category around procurement, this is a really interesting one to unpack a bit. City procurement models are, perhaps not surprisingly, designed around last century's technology. So they're designed for conventional bus models, often the internal combustion engine, which typically have a low upfront cost but higher operating costs. And so even if the total cost of ownership is higher than an electric bus, the procurement model essentially penalizes the electric bus in open competition. The other thing we found was that in the procurement model and also in the planning process between agencies, what would traditionally have lived purely as a responsibility of the transit agency with a conventional bus, with an electric bus, you're now talking about responsibilities that need to be allocated across different agencies, including things like the procurement and provision of electricity. And so that governance issue, which is first rears its ugly head at the procurement interface, ultimately becomes a longitudinal barrier. In the third category around people, we found, perhaps not surprisingly, a general lack of knowledge around electric buses, but also a lack of data for key analyses that would overcome that knowledge barrier. Examples of that would be inputs for the initial cost-benefit analysis, or the ability to simulate what and how much infrastructure will we need, what combination or ratio of depot versus opportunity charging, fast versus conventional charging. Those sorts of simulation tools are being developed by ourselves and others, but the input data for that is generally missing. And then lastly, in the fourth category of paying for it, we found this really to be the largest and the most universal barrier. Really what you're shopping for is large, risk-tolerant capital investments, something that cities are often ill-equipped to secure, especially those that have creditworthiness issues or debt servicing issues. And so this saddles the city with really one option, which is to secure financing through the manufacturers. In cities where there's only really one purveyor of electric buses, that means a captured market. So that's a dynamic that we saw relatively often and has led us to some additional work that will investigate and ground truth on the ground, new financing instruments that bring in additional actors, including the utility, that can take some of these capital investments onto their balance sheet that typically have a higher risk tolerance, and that at least in theory are highly motivated, highly incentivized for these new energy loads to come onto the grid as new revenue streams for them. So I would welcome further conversations with you all on that sort of ground truthing as we roll up our sleeves in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. This is it's a great summary. It's very much in line with what we've been finding too. Rachel Moncrief now from the International Council on Clean Transportation, the program director, please. And I'm happy I have a seat now.
Thank you very much. So I'm really excited to talk about basically the barriers and the sort of policies and incentives, and I think it's very in line with what Emma discussed, looking at sort of the uptake of all EVs. We do have at ICCT, I want to just give a little plug beforehand, a small but very prolific team that's very focused on sort of understanding the EV market, understanding the barriers, and understanding all the different range of policies and incentives. And so there's a lot of additional sort of information and reports on our website that can be found. First, I just wanted to start out with the numbers. So these are 2017 data, so they're a little bit old, but basically that data was saying there's 3 million electric vehicles currently on the road. And all of those electric vehicles, 98% of them are in 4 markets: China, the US, Europe, and Japan. And also out of that 3 million, about half of them are located in 25 cities. And those cities where half the vehicles are being driven and sold is only responsible for about 12% of the global vehicle sales, so definitely a disproportionate. So and I should also mention in those cities, they have about 24 times the charging per capita than other places. So basically, with all that information together, it's like, that's the areas where we got to look, we got to see kind of what they're doing that's working. I agree with Emma on the barriers. We don't have the P's, but we basically have the same barriers, which is the availability of the models, the higher upfront cost, the basically charging convenience, and then the consumer awareness. And of course, you need different policies to deal with those different barriers. So on the model availability, one of the best policies is sort of zero-emission vehicle mandates coupled with efficiency regulations, usually at the national level. On the higher upfront cost, financial incentives are one of the best policies. And then on the charging issues, of course, building up infrastructure in multiple kinds of locations, public and private and areas. And then on the fourth one, which is the consumer awareness, is obviously like many different kinds of consumer information campaigns. Just to talk a little bit more about the first two, the zero-emission vehicle standards and the financial incentives. So there's really, right now, only 4 places in the world that have zero-emission vehicle kind of mandates, and that is California, Quebec, China, and Europe. And the ones in, I say China, California, and Quebec, they're all kind of similar. They're kind of based on the California ZEV mandate, where essentially every manufacturer needs to generate a certain number of zero-emission vehicle credits every year, a different, like, a vehicle might be worth a certain amount of credits. Like, for example, in China's new energy vehicle mandate, you could have one vehicle generating up to 6 credits based on the vehicle range and other things like that. In Europe, it's a little bit different. It's not so much as a mandate, it's that it's only an incentive. So basically, in Europe, they're basically being incentivized that you have to sell a certain number of electric vehicles, but if you don't meet that mandate, there's actually no penalty. But for example, the one in China and the one in Europe, they're both coupled with efficiency standards, and we think that's really, really important. So you say like, all right, you have to sell a certain number of zero-emission vehicles, but on the other hand, we're also going to be increasing the mandated efficiency of your fleet as well. And so that does a number of things. That basically pushes the cost of conventional ICE vehicles up because they have to get more and more efficient. And so it closes the gap with zero-emission vehicles, and sometimes it's going to be more cost-effective to bring in zero-emission vehicles earlier to meet those policies. Because we have to remember there's going to be a lot more conventional vehicles sold between now and the time we're fully phased into electric vehicles, something on the order of about 3 billion. And then just a minute on the financial incentives. So basically, they're all doing it a little differently. In the US, there's an income tax credit if you buy a zero-emission vehicle. In China, they've been favoring more government subsidies. And in Europe, they've been doing essentially like a tax scheme where they differentiate the vehicle tax based on sort of how much CO2 that vehicle emits. So zero-emission vehicles are going to have much less tax. Different member states are doing these kind of differently. I think one of the things we've really learned about these kind of financial programs, they're great, but they can be costly to the government, so you have to find a way of having them pay for themselves. So you have to basically, if we're going to be giving zero-emission vehicles a benefit, then you have to probably be raising money from people when they're buying higher polluting vehicles, essentially like that. So just to kind of sum up, we see it as like perhaps some of these barriers, like the cost of electric vehicles or the charging infrastructure, they might take care of themselves sort of over time, but we don't really have that time to wait. So we have to kind of put in place policies now that are going to really like accelerate and get rid of and sort of decrease these barriers much faster than they would happen on their own. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello? Thank you so much, Rachel. So let's hear, thanks for also pointing out that everything that we do in this field seems to be owed in 2 months, And so we make an effort of data collection, et cetera, and in 2 months, that's not it anymore. It's going really fast, right? So now we want to hear from Hong, a policy researcher at the Qatar China Automotive Technology and Research Center.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here to introduce the NEV policy in China. First of all, I'd like to introduce what the NEV is. what NEV is. The NEV is new energy vehicle. It includes the battery electric vehicles, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and the fuel cell electric vehicles. And the non-plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is now the NEV in China, is the energy-saving vehicle. And the purpose of China development of NEV is to alleviate the energy crisis and reduce the air pollution. There have been three demonstration and promotion pilot programs in China, and 2 milestones was set at the second programs. You can see the market grew rapidly from the second program. China's NEV development process can be divided into 5 policy strategies. The stage one is before 2009. The policy in this stage is focused on the R&D, as the technology is the basement of NEV development. The stage 2 is from the 2009 to 2012. With the success of the demonstration in the 2009 Beijing Olympic Games, the stage 2 started and focused on the demonstration of electric bus, demonstration of electric bus in pilot cities. In 2009, the subsidy policies was first released, and in 2012, the state central released their industry layout and set up the market target of 500,000 in use in 2015 and 5 million in use in 2020. The stage 3 is from 2013 to 2015. The subsidies of this stage focus on the demonstration of new energy cars, buses, and special vehicles, and improving the use environment. In 2013, the new subsidy policies was released. In 2014, the NEV purchase tax exemption is issued. In the same year, the state control published the guidance on speeding up the NEV development, and highlighted on speeding up the construction of charging infrastructure, and then the subsidy policy for the charging infrastructure has published in 2015. The stage 4 is from the 2016 to 2020. This stage, the major task of this stage is to optimize the industry environment as according to the new industry situation. Some management policies were released for the first time, such as the NEV and the CAFE creative policy, and some management policies was updated, such as the permit to production and permit to investment. And stage 5 is after 2020. We call it the post-subsidy stage because the subsidy policies will be ended after 2020. We are helping the government to develop the new policy system to continue promoting the NEV. But actually, we are still in the exploring the what the most effective policy to replace the subsidy policy in the post-subsidy stage. So we very much hope to exchange the experience with the different country and the different situations. Thank you.
I don't know. Is this working? Yeah? Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. I just can say just one thing. I wish we had started in the early 19s with that, but that's a very, short term, in what are we talking about? 12 years we have, from nothing to everything. And so that's super impressive. Thank you very much. Emma, I want to ask you a question. I think that, both you and Rachel mentioned about the fact that financing and mainly funding issues, right? But my sense working in this agenda is that financing has not been a problem. Well, at least financing instruments are not a problem. But there's something else. Well, funding certainly always is a problem. But what challenges do we have to face, and what are the incentive mechanisms that we have to put in place to expand the development and speed up this implementation, in our opinion?
Well, I thought Rachel put it very well that without the fuel economy standards bringing up the floor and then some of the ZEV mandates to continually raise the ceiling, we're either not going to accelerate fast enough to meet the ever-shrinking window for curbing climate change, which is about 12 years now, or we will continue to have very high rates of morbidity and mortality as a function of poor air quality in urban cores. So in terms of the question of financing and funding, I mean, I think we should be looking beyond the transportation sector, personally. I think we should be looking at the real estate sector, which is hardly a model or a poster child for green, though there have been significant strides there. But in the financing realm, there's some really interesting models that have taken off, and ESCOs are now just commonplace. I mean, in India, you have super ESCOs that are effectively bringing down the cost of technology by technology, from ballast to light bulb to window glazing, through bulk purchasing, and then taking the cost of those upgrades onto their own balance sheet, and the owners are paying back over time. Utilities have, for many years, helped real estate customers amortize the cost of renewables through on-bill financing. So there's lots of opportunity to look cross-sector. And one of the things, if I may be so bold in a room full of transportation experts to say, is that I feel that there's a lot of insularity in this sector, and we would benefit from taking a wider angle view.
Absolutely. Rachel, now you know that Hema tried to open up. I'm going to close again and come back to sustainable mobility a little bit. What are your thoughts in aligning the uptake of e-mobility technologies with the complementary goals for public transportation and sustainable mobility?
Sure. Is this okay? Great. Perfect. Yeah. No. I mean, I think that I think we're hearing already that they can be extremely complementary, especially when you consider that many cities are still struggling a lot with obviously air quality issues. So zero emissions, not only from the climate perspective, but also from the air quality perspective, is really important for cities. And they have the opportunity to essentially be the leader by doing the procurement and everything like that. I think when you see buses is the first thing people think about when they think about public transport, and I think it's almost a perfect fit there because I mean the technology is available, the
from our studies at least, the total cost of ownership is actually less than the diesel fleet. And because the buses are running on regular routes and everything, that the charging sort of issues can be, they're not really a big issue because they can kind of like plan for the charging. So I think buses are perfect. But then when you look at like ride hailing, like we've done a lot of studies on like Lyft and Uber and stuff, and I think that there's some complementary, but then there's some also maybe not as complementary. So there's like the kind of benefit is these vehicles are running about 3 times the VMT of a regular passenger vehicle. So you're gonna get the payback much faster. So there would be a lot of incentive for like these Uber and Lyft drivers to like go EV. But of course there's the charging issue. So there's gonna have to be some downtime when they're charging, and they might see that as sort of like a cost issue. So then again, I think it's up to the cities. And I mean, a lot of cities are putting into place different policies, but I mean, one of the policies that we're very interested are sort of like these kind of low emission or zero emission zones where you have a major benefit from being able to have a vehicle. Either you can get into the city without having to pay like a fee, like in London, or you're just simply not even allowed in unless you have a vehicle that's sort of low or zero emitting. So I think the cities are going to have to kind of push to make sure that, that happens. So anyway.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think that you're right, that the total cost of ownership seems to be lower, et cetera, and the questions that we sometimes raise is the industry really ready? I think we're going to be able to see a little bit of that in our second round of speakers, but I wanted to finish with this first round with a question to Hong, and how to apply different EV to different levels of economic development, especially low-income countries. I think that it's a question that we always ask ourselves: what's the role of the low-income countries on this?
Thank you for your question, and I will try to answer your question from the experience in China. In the low country cities or the Euro areas, people are gradually using the electric scooters instead of the traditional scooters. This is also a very important part of the electrification of the transformation. The electric scooter or the electric bicycle are quiet and have no emissions. And people do now need to go to the gas station to refill. They can charge in their own home, and the price of the electricity is lower than the diesel or the gasoline. And sometimes the government don't need to build the charging stations for the electric scooters. So for the low-income countries, I think they can first start with the public sectors, including the buses, the taxis, and the sanitation vehicles, and then they can encourage people to replace their traditional scooters into electric scooters or bicycles, and finally gradually transition to the private car section.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So I'd like to invite you, our next speaker, to talk. He's the Deputy General Manager of Shenzhen Bus Group, and I think he's, he can speak on behalf of one big industry, right? And thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Here comes the lab mice, the white mice of the electric bus industry. Gosh, how do I condense our 10 years of experience into 5 minutes? How many of you have been to Shenzhen? Can you raise your hands? Okay, not that many. For those of you who have not been to Shenzhen, I'll just give you a brief background about Shenzhen. Shenzhen became a city in 1979. In 1979, it was known, I'm from Hong Kong, by the way, and in 1979, Shenzhen was known as the Wild West. Nobody wanted to go there. And at that time, the population in Shenzhen was about 300,000. And GDP in 1979 was 20 million US. Nowadays, we have a registered population of 13 million. And GDP, I read yesterday, was 330 billion US. It surpassed Hong Kong. It's now the top 5 GDP city in Asia, after Tokyo, after Singapore, after Beijing and Shanghai. So tremendous development in the last 40 years, and it's all down to a very, very innovative idea by the central government to designate Shenzhen as a special economic zone. And since then, a lot of investment gone into Shenzhen, and as you probably know, a lot of big companies now have their headquarters in Shenzhen. BYD, by far probably the largest electric bus developer in the world. You have Tencent, WeChat payment. You have Huawei. You have also DJI, the biggest drone manufacturers in the world. They're all based in Shenzhen. And at Shenzhen Bus, we've made a bit of a name for ourselves as well, for being the largest and electric bus operator in the world. I've got 3 minutes. So when I came to Shenzhen in 2015, I became the deputy general manager. And first day on my desk was, right, you need to purchase 1,600 buses. And then at that time, I was in charge of procurement and also in charge of infrastructure. And buying the buses is easy, because we have a government with a lot of, a very, very deep pocket and very eager to push us into sort of like the green energy buses. But, some of our speakers earlier talk about infrastructure, the construction. That's a nightmare. That's a real headache. So we've had to look for sites. We've built infrastructure overnight. So, and then straight after 1,600 buses, I got another assignment. Just buy another 3,500 buses. So another round of purchasing, procurement, and infrastructure construction. So as it happened, by 2017, we have 6,000 electric buses. And then we've gone into the next round of buying electric taxis. So now we have 6,000 buses and 4,800 electric taxis. And as you can imagine, the procurement and the construction and all the retraining of all our staff, the drivers and the maintenance, all our depots. Previously, they were doing sort of like all the maintaining all the diesel buses, petrol taxis, and now we all overnight we have to change them. So a lot of hard work, and which I can't even start to share, talk about with you in such a short time. But just to give you some idea. On the slide here, the benefit that change has brought to the city. Just some of the figures here, as you can see. The noise reduction is obviously, like a tremendous noise, reduction in noise to the city, to the sidewalk. Tremendous decrease in terms of emission. CO emission dropped by 400 tons. NO2 emission dropped by 330 tons. SO2 dropped by almost 1,700 tons. So plus a lot of other sort of like noise issue and environmental issues. For each bus now we're saving in the equivalent of 26 tons of coal equivalent a year. 26 tons of coal equivalent a year. So multiply that by over 6,000 buses. So as you can see, the sort of benefit that's brought to the city is tremendous. And for us ourselves, we talk about costing. Like, okay, we have the initial cost for buying the buses, but again, Emma here talked about actually the subsequent sort of reduction in terms of operating costs is tremendous for us as well. We're saving a lot. For each bus, we're saving over $8,000 per year in terms of energy costs. So at this point, I stop because I've got the science, but I'll be happy to share with you more information afterwards. Okay.
Thank you very much. Now I invite Mr. Liu, Executive Deputy Secretary General of China EV 100. Yes. Do you want to come over, or if you want to stay there? Thank you.
Last week, Chinese Minister of Industry and Information Technology, Mr. Miao Wei, announced China produced 1.25 million electric vehicles in year 2018, and the Chinese EV industry became 2 trillion RMB industry chain last year. But China is the largest developing country. GDP 2018 is about $9,000 per capita, just 1/5 of that USA. So there's no China miracle. Everything depends on hard working and good learning. What we think about is that it started 10 years ago. Year 2009, China first time produced 10 million ICEV, internal combustion EVs, which is a 10 years continuous growth with double digital. And expected of the GDP growth for 30 years at that time is around 10% annually. But China suffered heavy air pollution. The government have shut down all of most of the manufacturers near Beijing to keep year 2018 Beijing Olympic Games, make the air clean. So people call that Olympic blue sky. And the US Embassy in China, in Beijing, installed its own air quality monitoring system and published the air quality index on the internet. So many people in Beijing follow that index to check out the air quality problem. So at this game, 500 trial demonstration EVs have applied. At that time, the EV population or production is around 10,000. So the policy making in China has to start to think about what we can do in the future. Because 2/3 of China crude oil imported from overseas. For example, year before last year, 200 million tons of crude oil imported, plus 400 million tons imported, plus 200 million tons produced. And the Chinese, 1,000 Chinese people own 150 cars, worth worldwide average 260, US 800, Japan 500, Korea 400. The number could be double if China keeps the economic growth. Secondly, the air quality could be much worse if the car number increased. Thirdly, carbon dioxide footprint increase is not a viable solution. Fourth, transportation congestion problem will be serious. So that year 2009, the government issued a document, decided to change to electric vehicle as a state industry strategy. And at that time, China first started with 10 cities, with each city with 1,000 electric vehicles, special buses for Shenzhen, Zhuzhou, and other major cities to promote the program with government sponsor. So my time is almost just to give you a reason. And the Next one, from technical side, the engineering in China has also problem. We have 29 million cars produced last year, but China really don't have efficient engine, internal combustion engine and the transmissions. So we have to find a new way to produce our energy efficient vehicles. That's what we call battery operated vehicle. With electrochemistry progress, China made it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu, and it's impressive to see how China, tackled the problem of air pollution in such a short time and with such strong response, right? Now let's hear a little bit about the experience of India, and I see you with Sanjay. Sanjay, please. Sorry, let me introduce you. Sanjay is the co-founder and CEO of Lithium Urban Technologies. Yes, you're on.
Hello? Yeah? Okay, so I'm just going to be sitting here. I'm, first of all, really privileged and honored to be sitting amongst giants. Thank you to my friend Juan and Bianca, you to have even got me here on the stage. A little bit of our story. We are Lithium Urban Technologies. We are India-based. We are 3.5 years old. Think of us as an Ola, Uber, or a Grab, but just 100% electric, business to business, and profitable. The thesis of us getting into EVs 4 years back was essentially driven by the fact that hydrocarbons are limited, renewables, the price of cost of renewables is coming down, essentially driven by the science and scale in China. And really, it's probably one of those times in which, an inflection point in which, in transportation, where this proportionality of price proportional to distance can be broken by low energy costs. So we looked at transportation through an energy lens and said, can we re-engineer how transportation is done? And that's why we started this business. Today we are, and thanks Jack for saying that you're 4,500 cars. So therefore that officially I can say that we are the largest EV fleet in the world outside of China. So that's what we are. We run our own fleet. We own our own fleet, primarily because of financing issues, right? Capacity doesn't exist in this world, so that capacity needs to be built. We created our own charging infrastructure, so we own the largest DC charging infrastructure in India, and probably the most efficient one. Hello? Yeah? So each of our fast chargers, out of 40 minutes in a day, work for about 1,260 minutes. What do we sell? We don't sell because we are green. We essentially sell because we are cheaper. Nobody buys our services because we're green. Everyone buys because we are cheaper. We sell to corporates, and we help reduce in an industry where transportation accounts for about 4 to 8% of their costs. We save about 40% of costs for our clients, right? We've probably had one of the first implementations of connected cars in which we pull about 60 parameters about the car, the battery, temperature, XYZ. We know how efficient driver in terms of energy. We've built our own EV-specific fleet management system that helps schedule the vehicle. So everything that you spoke about in the past in terms of how do you do opportunistic charging and stuff like that. Obviously, if we were selling productivity and we had to, and these are, please look at it from a perspective that in India, which is extremely cost efficient, and these are not high voltage cars with an autonomy of 400 kilometers per charge. These are cars that do 100 kilometers, rated with HVAC running, with average speeds of about, city speeds of about 14, 15 kilometers. And Amit there, who's sitting in that orange, is orange coat, is one of the biggest experts in urban mobility in India, and he'll tell you that average city speeds are no more than 15 kilometers an hour. So in that kind of an environment, our cars do about anywhere between 275 to 350 kilometers a day. And therefore, and all of this without government intervention or government support. When we started this business, I think one of the financing was one of the issues in which even a private sector bank had only seen an EV in an airport, a buggy. And so when we started this business, there were two challenges to say, hey, will this EV actually run on the road? And two, will Lithium as a new company be able to pull it off? Yeah, I think we've proven our oldest cars in 36 months are the first cars that we bought have done in excess of 220,000 kilometers. There's been no degradation in the battery performance in spite of them being charged, fast charged 3 times a day. Yeah, and we make money, and that's why I guess IFC invested in us. So we are here. We'd love to connect with you all to see how we can take what the different people have done some magical stuff in different parts of the world. How can that be repurposed and applied back in markets like India, where there is tremendous amount of energy arbitrage between hydrocarbon pricing and renewable energy, and every market that has that arbitrage can typically use EVs very, very profitably. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I was discussing with you, just recently, just before the session, on the subsidies that you have in India, and how these play into the. So I just want to tell everyone to look for you and talk about it later. Also about the interoperability of and the standardization of charging stations and things like that. That I think that is an issue that we will have to look in with more detail now. So now I invite George Mulla. George is the founder and CEO of the DART Techno Hama ICT Business Incubator.
Hello. The lovely timekeeper starts timing the moment you stand up, so I'll sit down if you don't mind, and I've calculated that. I'll save about 360 milliseconds, and add more information. I want to thank the World Bank and Bianca for having invited me to come here. Listening to these great giants here, I thought I was the odd one out, but now I think I should consider myself the king. Why do I say that? I fly drones, and they're on the ground, I'm high up in the air. Most of you saw the Lake Victoria Challenge video clip yesterday, and we call it in short the LVC. Now, to give you a bit of background, Lake Victoria is in the center of the African continent, right on the equator, just below the equator. It's got a population of about 40 million people in 3 different countries that surround that lake, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And the LVC was brought about to address the challenges that are found on the island. There are roughly, for all 3 countries, there are roughly about 300 and some odd islands. But on the Tanzanian side, where I come from, there are about 84 islands with people habiting those islands. And there is a disconnect in terms of the transport infrastructure and the difference between the urban and the rural areas. So imagine that your son, your daughter, your parent gets bitten by a snake on one of those islands. Or imagine that there's a pregnant lady who's going to give birth and suddenly not enough blood and blood is needed. What do you do there? Right now, currently, the ferry boat plies around the islands once a day, and it takes an average between 4 to 6 hours to reach these islands. So that creates a problem, and that's why we came up with a new mobility in terms of drones or autonomous drones. We did a trial with the support of GIZ about 8 months ago, and it was a big success. We saved lives. But then we needed to see what other use cases could be done. So the LVC now is partnered with the World Bank, or the World Bank is supporting LVC to build the use cases that can be scaled up and run commercially. Now, what we're trying to do is see how we can link to the digital transformation and also be the moonshine of the whole region that is there, and look at the regulatory framework, the industry to come and play a part, and to see how can we provide services to these people with disruptive approaches and to thinking out of the box to have impact that will make a difference in our region. So we are now looking for partners to come in. We'll talk about that later. So now that I've made you curious, I'll stop here for now and elaborate later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess that we're so fascinated by drones and what they can bring in, to our lives. And I think that there is a parallel session now also talking about drones, and the person complained that I had stolen Mr. Mula for our session. But I guess that this adds, an interesting point of view, and the fact that we can use a lot of electric mobility for logistics. And I think that that's a part. We've been focusing a lot on public transport and on buses, which is our bread and butter, let's say, and what we have to influence in the cities we work with. But we are failing a little bit because the cities are failing themselves also on looking into issues of urban logistics and the role that E can have in urban logistics, especially the last mile. So Joe, where do you see the objectives of e-mobility misaligning with the state of industry, and what can be done to develop closer collaboration? You were on the ground doing this, and I'm sure you can share a little bit of your experience.
I think I can break that down into two major sectors, right? Two major perspectives. One from the institutional, governmental perspective, is that we have, on the one hand, a government who is very committed to, e-mobility, e-vehicles, but at the same time, we are not getting a lot of policy support on sort of like restricting private vehicles growth. In China, it's difficult because it's a developing country. It has a very rising middle class, and with rising middle class, what you do is people like to own their cars. So that's one major gap that we have in China. But in Shenzhen, what government is actually doing now is to, if you want to get a traditional, like a petrol car or diesel car, you need to wait for a license. You need to wait for the licensing, or even there's a lottery system, basically, to get the license. But if you want to buy a green vehicle, if you want to buy an electric vehicle, you can get the license straight away. But that doesn't resolve the problem of congestion in the city. So that I see is at the government level and sort of like institutional level. And at the commercial level, there is also a bit of a gap because manufacturers are, we're still looking for sites, the suppliers, the battery charging suppliers, and even operators like ourselves. We need to look for sites. We're constantly having to struggle to look for sites and look for sort of the construction of the infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and also there is a bit of a people can charge the car at home. So why go to a professional charging service providers? So that market is still to be explored. And also, I also see a gap between sort of like at the moment, Shenzhen as a city itself is fine, but if you want to drive beyond Shenzhen, basically you can drive out, but you can't drive back if you have an electric car, because there's no charging service, service maybe in the neighboring cities or provinces or whatever. So again, I see an opportunity in terms of for charging service provider to build a network of charging stations. It's a bit like the petrol stations that we have on our highways and motorways. So I see this as a big opportunity for China, which hasn't really quite been looked into and explored yet. So those are the two major kind of gaps that I see in terms of implementation of EVs in China. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing these points in. And I would like Mr. Liu to ask Mr. Liu, what solutions do you envisage for addressing the chicken and egg problem that Joe just mentioned, the problem of EV uptake and charging infrastructure development? Where do you see we can address this issue?
Hello? Thank you. Chicken or eggs, that's a problem. And still a problem for China. But for very beginning, for charger station, especially for public charging stations, there's some characteristics of the public sector. So the government has sponsored the installation of the charging stations for public sector. For private sector, the personal ownership, 80% of Chinese EV owners have their own private charge posts, and which is free from the manufacturer. And this year, China installed about 250,000 of the new charges, public charge stations, public charge posts. By year, it's planned year 2020, another 500,000 will be installed by that year. For private sector, the people who have the parking lot, it's easy. But if they don't have the parking lot, that's really a problem. So when people went to the dealership will always ask the same question: do you have parking lot? If you don't have, you think about it carefully, because public charge post or stations is not quite convenient at the moment.
Yes, and I think that we can see that also for public transportation. The operators that have space, that have the depots with sufficient size, are the ones better positioned to be able to implement this infrastructure, to charge this big fleet of, I think that in general, we think that the electric buses won't generate a lot more demand from the electricity grid in absolute numbers, but it does require, a kind of strong, if you're charging 90 buses at the same time in the same location, well, that's quite a demand that you have to attend, and so that's an issue that has to be figured out. So I would like to finalize with a question to George and Sanjay. Given that you've been working in the frontier of technology, really on the ground, and I want to hear what will be the future of converging autonomous vehicles with electric vehicles. What will happen in the long term, in the near term? What's your vision? And
Okay. Before that, actually, one of the things, just on what the gentleman both from Shenzhen and from China said, I mean, it's very different in Asia as compared to the West, right? And to what Sir said when he presented about, ownership of cars. I just wanted to touch base on that. I think charging infrastructure and the availability or lack of that is kind of hyped a bit more than what it needs to. Mobility in Asia, or adoption of EVs in Asia will not happen with the individual user, and that use case is the most energy inefficient way for EV adoption, right? If you look at whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's the rest of the developing world, adoption of EVs will happen in shared mobility. In shared mobility, there's a pattern, right? And it's easier to create charging infrastructure for shared mobility. For corporates or companies that run shared mobility services. You don't, and I believe that as shared mobility evolves, there will be different service providers that do different things. So, daytime use, during your work day, work week, use Shenzhen bus company's bus or use Lithium's cabs. If you want to go out of town, use blah blah or XYZ or whatever, right? And that's the way the world will move. The traditional ways, I have a car, I need to go from here to Timbuktu. You don't have charging infrastructure, I won't switch. I don't think that's the way I think the rest of the Western world looks at mobility, and that needs to be dispelled. And that's because everyone here already has a car. No one owns a car in Asia, right? And therefore that's one part. And that also is a segue into the question that you asked. Labor is cheap, fuel is not, right? I will substitute fuel first before I substitute the driver, right? For the first time in the history of transportation for 100 years, there is a opportunity to make fuel into a competitive advantage. Till now, everyone bought gas at the same price at the high street petrol pump. Today, with open access, renewable XYZ, I can differentiate between me and my next competitor based on fuel cost, right? And yet have zero tailpipe reduction. So, that's the reason why from day one, even for a small company of our size, 90% of what fuel we use is renewable. Because that's the trajectory that we want to go to. Because we firmly believe that one day, utilities, as you mentioned, will not sell power on a per kilowatt hour basis. They will sell it on a per application basis. And that confluence is more between three things, between mobility, energy companies, and real estate companies. And coming back to your, the autonomous, I think for regions like us where there is just that many people, it'll have a social problem if you just get away with drivers. But yeah, there is adoption of the technologies of autonomy that means safer ride, more secure ride, and increased productivity. So elements of technology will be adopted as the price drops and become mainstream. So if it is ADAS, you will see it coming in new cars, but you will find cost-effective retrofit solutions for vehicles as well that makes commute, whether it be a three-wheeler, two-wheeler, four-wheeler, bus, whatever, safer for people. I think that's the way I think things will go.
From our perspective, convergence is a bit tricky in the sense that, first of all, we are pushing the boundaries of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles in terms of the lower space and flying drones, and particularly when you're trying to reach the rural and marginalized citizens of our country. So in our part of the world, we tend to feel that the electric and the autonomous complement each other for now. And this is factored upon the delivery model versus the envisaged payload that you want to use. Because, and also, all this is complemented by the regulatory framework that has been put in place to allow whether you use an electrical vehicle in the sense of a drone or an autonomous vehicle. The autonomous ones means that there's no pilot and you can carry a heavier load of up to 1,000 kg, kilograms that is. Whereas the drones, the largest, aside from the tests that are being done in terms of flying passengers in Dubai from the city to the airport, but when it comes to cargo and other payloads, they range so far about 45 or 50 kg. Now, the issue is in terms of the use cases that will allow to say which business model do you take and what are you trying to do. The use cases tend to vary and that impacts on whether there's convergence or not. For example, are you trying to take animal insemination seeds to the animals, to the farmers in the rural areas, so that you reduce the fertilization of a cow from 100 USD for one cow up to 20 USD per cow? Or are you trying to do e-trade? Are you trying to use the digital transformation techniques like utilization of fabrication labs and 3D printers in order to give services to the people? But the crucial point has to do with the operating costs and how are you going to lower them. We see nowadays that the cost of batteries is coming down, and it's much cheaper to run a drone on battery rather than on petrol. So these are the issues that we look at in terms of convergence, and it's and the whole idea is to try and reduce the cost and complexity of operations of such electrical vehicles. And that is what, so we tend to see that for now, in our part of the world, they complement each other, and the convergence maybe will come much, much later because of the regulatory framework that we have in running these vehicles.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have time for questions from the public now. If anyone wants, yes, please, if you can go to that mic over there.
Hello, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I have a comment question regarding the charging infrastructure and the necessity for large lots for buses and everything. There are new technologies like wireless charging for electric buses or vehicles, even for drones, that can be used for charging along the way, for opportunity charging, which reduces the amount of batteries, therefore the weight of the buses, and also optimizes the charge level for the batteries. In Europe, in Mannheim and in Braunschweig, there are working operations for over 4 or 5 years already. And I think that that's a very interesting alternative. And if anybody's interested, I have more information on the subject. Thank you.
Yeah, I missed the question, but yeah, there are new technologies and there are old technologies like trolleybuses, and you know that also. I don't know if anyone wants to comment this on the panel. Maybe Joe. Yeah.
I'll give a quick answer to that. I think different types of charging methods or modes are available all over the world. In Shenzhen, we have specifically gone for nighttime charging, nighttime fast charging, because for start, the nighttime electricity price is 1/5 of the daytime price. So for us, the nighttime, all the buses go back to the depot, and we can just charge them overnight, and then they can run during the daytime. We have typically our buses on a full charge, 2 hours. Can go for 200 kilometers. So that would fit in quite well with most of our routings. But for some of the routings that are going beyond the 200 kilometers on a daily basis, they come back for lunchtime and do a quick charge. So what we do is in Shenzhen, we make use of the cheap electricity at nighttime and then to charge our buses. And I agree with the gentleman there. There are other types of opportunity charging, like remote, sorry, what you call it, remote charging. With opportunity charging, what we did look at that in the city, but with opportunity charging, although the battery pack will be much lighter, but the daytime electricity price is a lot higher. And in terms of the infrastructure, for those of you who've been to Shenzhen, it's a very green city, a lot of landscaping on the curbside. So to build the infrastructure for the overhead cable charging, that would kind of have, go against the landscaping of the city, and also the pricing issue there. Remote charging, we also have looked at that, and there's a lot of wastage between the while charging, because the plug-in is the most efficient, it's the most direct, and you lose the less. So that's why we gone for the charging that we have. But I agree that there's no one answer to everything.
Exactly.
So
yes, definitely. So both of you, the gentleman that asked the question, the context is everything, right? And I think that the best solution for each context might be different, definitely. And some of the solutions are there for a while now, right? The trolleybus is one of the opportunity charging that works, and for some reason, in some countries it disappeared. Most of the cable thing is a bit of a nuisance, but it does exist, and it might work for some contexts.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My question's two-part, and the first part is, how has China, with such increased and super scaled up EV adoption from fleets to the individual cars, what are you doing about lithium, the battery recycling, or how is that folding into the planning and the infrastructure planning and environmental remediation? And then my second question is, what are the specific challenges relating to building out the charging infrastructure outside of Shenzhen? Because I'm from Colorado, and we've been able to create an intermountain state, basically a memorandum of understanding to build out electric vehicle infrastructure in our rural mountain states across 8 states, and wondering if that's something that is possible provincially in China or across state lines, or however you organize things there.
I'll suggest, thank you very much for your question. It's a very important one. Can I just get one more, and then we tackle both questions at the same time, if possible?
Hi, Steve Winkleman from Green Resilience Strategies. Also a question about batteries, per Emma's comment about looking for innovative finance partners in the energy sector. One of the challenges for an owner of an electric bus is that there's not necessarily a mature resale market for that vehicle, and that can be a significant revenue stream. So I'm curious, I've heard in China there's some partnerships for reusing batteries for energy storage after they've been expired their sort of duty cycle for mobile application, and if that's a significant revenue stream for you or just, something smaller.
Yeah, I'm happy we bundled those two questions together. They're similar. So who wants to take that? Mr. Liu or Joe, or maybe?
For China, we have the highway and interprovincial highways. For those highways, China has 2 electrical grid company. One is called China State Power Grid. Another one is Southern Power Grid. Both of them are responsible, actually, install a charger station along the highway. Until now, around about 9 major national highways installed with charger stations. The space between each charge station around 50 kilometers. But for the local highway installation, depends on local infrastructure positions. So that's for long term is still a problem, because you have to drive 200 or 300 kilometers, you have to stop for charger. Probably take half hours, an hour, something like that. So basically, current technology support electric vehicle is to short-term or mid-term transportation vehicles. So that's basically, if you install big batteries, you can maybe run 600 kilometers, but it's too expensive. So for the yield of the future, we recommended the users use electric vehicles for short-term transportation, but maybe the fossil fuel electric vehicle is good for long-distance transportation, because each charge only takes 3 minutes, and it can drive 600 kilometers.
Sanjay, maybe, and then Joe, maybe you can take the lead in.
No, I think this question on financing is actually a very pertinent one, especially for if private sector were to adopt, high capital or capital intensive assets like buses, what happens on the residual value, and even for the drivers. I mean, today companies like Shenzhen or us or others, all the assets have to be owned by us specifically because of that, because the owner driver is still has a big question mark on what happens to the car the day I want to sell it. What's the resale value? And with 60% of the value of the asset being in the battery. So I think one of the things that we are trying, and I wouldn't say we are successful at it as yet, but one of the things that we are looking at is, doing something with cell tower, and they use similar backup batteries, lithium-ion batteries, but of course, their charge and discharge rates are far more flatter than that for the automotive applications, but that helps. So even if your battery is 70% below what when you bought it at, or 60%, I think just the fact that it's so dense and as compared to a traditional lead acid battery that's currently being used, I think there's tremendous amount of application that can be done in the telecom sector as one. So that's what we are trying to do on that.
Joe, maybe you want to complement what are you doing with your batteries and if there's, and then Rachel, I don't know if you have something to add on that.
What we do with our, we haven't actually, just to share a bit about whole procurement kind of process. We're working very closely with our manufacturers. So what we do is, when we got rid of our old vehicles, one of the things that we did was put into our purchasing procurement, proposal was the manufacturers have to take their old buses back. So we work at a residual value, and then they buy the buses off us, and then they break them down, or they sort of rebuild them for other uses. The other things about the batteries is that what we do is at the end of the lifespan of the bus, manufacturers take the batteries back for recycling. So there's residual life value for the batteries. So Sanjay talked about domestic use, or you extract the raw material for recycling. So there is afterlife to the battery, to recycling for the battery. So so that's all written in our procurement contracts.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Yu.
One more. And for the recycle of the batteries, and the China Mobile, the largest mobile company, has a promise to recycle all the batteries used for the electric vehicle, because the communication towers in China, they use batteries for electricity. So after the battery used by a car, then for several years, the battery can be reused for the communication purposes. And that's very valuable. And another thing is that because the industry grows so fast, and in short term, most of the cars has not been replaced. So there still has a period to be installed a new industry called recycle industry.
I see. Thank you very much. Maybe, do you want to add something?
One closing comment in the spirit of cross-sectoral hand-holding. I could envision a world where buildings seeking to put on-site renewables therefore need storage, therefore become the consumers of secondhand batteries of electric vehicles, and revenue generators rather than cost centers for their owners. So the intersection between these two developments is really fascinating.
Thank you very much, Emma. I would like to close now the session, and thank you all for participating, and the panelists very much, and let's go for lunch.